Um, there's an inflation of accusations of phobic, like phobias, uh, projections, and I was thinking about monkeys or apes in trees, like a long, long time ago. There were monkeys in trees, and they were afraid to go down on the ground and go and find food. And the reason they were afraid was because they used to live on the ground, roaming around, and then one day a moving stick came out of nowhere and bit Bill, the one of the monkeys, bit him on the leg, and he were in pain, and then he died. So the other monkeys were like, "Fuck that! Let's live up in the trees because I don't want to be bitten by a stick that comes out of nowhere." Uh, but they were up in the trees and they sort of like, "Oh, well, we need to eat something. Well, I'll go down." So one of the monkeys went down and started picking some berries, and it went okay. And he went up and they had some food. And then the next day, oh, we need to eat something. So, okay, we both go down. All two of them went down because two can grab more food than one. So they both went down. And then uh, Mickey went that way and Joey went that way. And all of a sudden, a moving stick came out of nowhere and just slithered through between the legs of Joey and then just fucked off. And Joey was like, "Why didn't it bite me?" But he got really scared and he jumped away as soon as he saw the moving stick. And then they discussed, when they came back up in the tree, they discussed like, well, maybe it's not all sticks that bite. And the other guy said like, well, maybe it's not all sticks, but if we go out and a moving stick comes, the one who jumps away and runs off scared will survive another day. And the one who doesn't care and stays, he has, let's say, a 50-50 chance of dying or living, depending on what snake it is. So the the logical, rational thing to do whenever you like see something moving, even if it's not a moving stick, even if it just resembles a moving stick, it's better to run away because that's that guarantees your survival. And if you stay, you have a 50% chance. And then this understanding of moving sticks becomes, oh, that's a snake, and there's different snakes, and certain snakes are poisonous, and other snakes are not. But still, even if it's not a snake, if it's actually a stick that's blowing in the wind, and you are out walking, it's better to jump away rather than to numb that instinct. Because if you're mistaken in that split second, you could end up dead. So it is a rational respect rather than an irrational fear that drives the instinct to like distance yourself quickly if you perceive what could be a snake. That's quite a sophisticated subconscious program running now. And you could say that people have a phobia of snakes, but that would only be correct if, like, if you have a snake that's not poisonous, that will not, like, we've been around these snakes for hundreds of years, and we know that certain snakes are neither poisonous nor bite at all, and then they can't harm you at all. And I come in and I put that snake on the table and I tell you this snake is completely harmless. And you still have a response that you want to run away and that you're afraid of the snake, then that could be called a phobia. Because it's not a rational respect for the snake in front of you. This is your projection and idea of a snake because in your mind you've constructed an idea that a snake is always scary. It's always, you should always fear snakes. And even though that idea is better to have than the absolute opposite, which would be like, I'm not afraid of any snake. Put a fucking cobra on the table and I will slap it and I will play with it. Then you have no rational respect for that creature that can kill you. So both these ideas can be constructed into ideologies that sort of have this root of disrespect of things that can kill you, or absolute fear of things that are harmless. And it's a survival strategy, it's an adaptation to an environment that you adapt to. Like I said that twice, but the person who is on one side can say, well, you have a phobia of snakes, and it's like, it's true, but you only have a phobia of certain snakes. And if you tell the other person that they have, well, they don't have a phobia at all, they have what would be the opposite of a phobia? They would have like, the thing that comes up is like disrespect. And it's sort of like this idea that's in uh, uh, Christianity, that's the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. If I tie that idea to this, what I've just laid out and explained, it's like the fear of God is to have respect, rational respect for that which can kill you. And also to treat the harmless with a sort of caring, consideration as well, because to the poisonous snake that can kill you, well, you can also kill it. So it needs to respect you with a rational respect. So it might, when it approaches you, even though it can kill you, it might run away too, because it knows that, well, it doesn't know, but that there might be some instinct in the snake that, like, if you stomp the ground, it feels the vibration and it knows that here's something heavy that can crush me, so I'll better run away, even though if I approach it, I might kill it. It might be 50-50. It might kill me, I might kill it, but if I run away, I might live another day. And the harmless snake, it can't kill you. Or maybe if it crawls down your throat and suffocate you, but other than that, it's pretty harmless. So it will run away. That's the best strategy for a harmless snake, is to avoid things that can kill it. So the harmless snake has the fear of God for the fear of God for the harmless snake is to always run away because that's rational thinking for the snake. But this is getting like I didn't expect to spend so much time on this because what I'm what I initially was thinking about was this idea of like phobias in our current culture that we're sort of using that as a derogatory term to make people less fearful or less concerned about things that might actually be harmful and things that are instinctually reasonable in the name of ideology and in particularly this woke ideology. And I'm not gonna do specifically like these current phobias uh, because I will be criticized from a critical theory lens that I am phobic just because I scratch the surface of their ideology just by questioning their dogma. And their dogma is to force people into self sacrifice, to go against their own instinct, their own rational thinking, and their own logic, their own beliefs by they're being like regular people are being bullied by this new religion because it's a poisonous snake. So people are walking around spewing these poisonous snakes into the dialogue. And if you have an instinctual response to be skeptical of what they're saying, then they accuse you of being phobic. So they conflate having a fear of God, having rational instincts that say, like, whoa, I'm not going to accept this behavior or this kind of thinking because it's poisonous. And their response is, you're phobic. Your fear is irrational. That's what they're saying. Even though you might have a reasonable respect and fear of, you might not actually have thought this through, but if you see like a poisonous snake and you know like instinctively that snake seems to be quite poisonous, and you sort of kind of freeze up, and then someone comes and tries to rationalize for you and say that this response you have is a phobia. You're actually, that fear you're feeling is irrational. They're kind of gaslighting you into accepting their dogma before having a civilized, rational conversation about it. And it's poisoning our whole culture, and it's actually causing everyone harm. Even the people who are spouting this ideology are becoming victims of it themselves, because they, well, first of all, they have this dichotomous thinking of perpetrator and victim, and they're always the victim. So how much freedom and how much uh, like, even if they're trying to inverse the dynamic, they will always, if they see themselves as a victim and they compete who's the most victimized, if that's the narrative, they will never be able to get beyond the breaking point of, like, nothing will ever be enough for them to not see themselves as a victim, because the victim is their identity. Even though they are the biggest bully in the room, their narrative is that they're still the biggest victim. So they can, it justifies the opposite behavior. So if you're a victim, you can act as a bully because you're doing it from the perspective of a victim. And that's exactly what a narcissist does. It's, well, like, it's, when I say narcissist, it's a projection. It's projective identity. So if you're projecting on yourself victimhood, and you're projecting on the other abuser or perpetrator or oppressor, and you are the oppressed, then you're not in reality anymore, because it doesn't matter what happens. You have to see it through the lens of the preconceived narrative. So if I'm a victim, I can kill you in self-defense, when in reality I'm just a murderer. But if I use this ideological filter to put on it, it was in self-defense. I couldn't do anything. I was like, that person had forced me to kill them. And it's just poison. The poison is already in the mind of the woke, and they've sort of cut the connection to reality. So they're living in their self-constructed narrative. And every time someone comes and tries to question it or pick a hole in it, they they spit poison at you because they don't want you to break their illusion. They want you to join them in the dichotomy of, they want you to play the part that they have pushed into their shadow, and you have to resist. You have to enforce your boundary and say, no, I'm not going to play the oppressor role in your game of victimhood. And it's really hard if you are conditioned to be a codependent, which, when I say codependent, I mean if you've been conditioned, if you've been raised to care for other people, to play into their needs, to be a giving person, to put yourself second, and someone comes along and tells you, you are the oppressor in my fantasy, you you take on that identity to help them because you want to, what's the word, you want to be of service to them. And this seems to be what they want. They want you to be their oppressor, but in reality they are abusing you because they're, do you see how fucked this is? How fucked up this whole movement is in our culture? And most people just play along because they don't see it. They are just programmed to play along. And I hope, I pray that you start to question well, I think we've come to some point in our whole culture that we need to sort of really take a step back and sort of practice detachment, and not from, I mean, this, it's so difficult because we live in a culture where everything becomes appropriated to the disease. Everything becomes poison. So every solution becomes twisted into being playing into the the psychosis. So even if I say, because it's like, I remember when I thought critical, to be critical of like the source material, you like in school, it's good to be critical to what you learn, because who's teaching you this? Whose agenda are you going along with? And then that became this critical theory that you should criticize everything except critical theory in itself. So it's like, who is your God? Who's pulling your strings? What is at the core? What is at the root core of who you are? It's like, why are you playing identity politics? And when I say identity, when you're playing identity politics, it's like, are you defining yourself by certain ideological narratives? Like, even if you're like a trans person, if you're claiming to be a woman trapped in a man's body, you're playing a game of identity. And who came up with the game? Who came up with the rules of that game? And can you see that you are inside that game playing it by trying to rebel against the previous Caesar? Was that too abstract? Like, if you're a boy and your parents say that you can never show girlish behavior, that restriction will grow in you. So you will have more and more thoughts about being a girl, feelings feelings about feeling like a girl, and you will become obsessed with the idea of girlhood, and then you will rebel against the parents by coming out as a girl, when in fact you're an individual, and from the get-go you had both masculine and feminine traits, but because your parents tried to beat out the feminine in you, it grew to a monster that couldn't be contained, so you had to come out as a girl. And I think like the whole like the narrative about where we come from, the history of humanity, has been so perverted and so rewritten through the lens of modern ideology that we believe that it was so. And now we can barely see history in any other way, because we're so we're swimming in this now. It's so in almost everyone is infected by the current ideology to the point that we can't see clearly. And I think it's like that this will also be really dangerous territory to talk about. But like the feminist movement has rewritten history to make it so that women were always victims to an oppressive man sphere. The manosphere has always oppressed the woman sphere. And I think it can't be true because if you have this dynamic, the it will destroy itself. It's a destructive ideology. So if this ideology it can't maintain itself for thousands of years. So it's a new construct, and then we've projected it onto the past. And I think it's really sneaky because I see like I use like I think of toxic masculinity being the way most radical feminists behave because they behave like a psychopath, indifferent of gender, indifferent of sexuality. If you're behaving like a fucking narcissistic psychopath, it doesn't matter what gender you have. It doesn't matter what's between your legs. If you're forcing yourself onto other people in that way, you're abusing people. You're calling people phobic because they don't agree. You're gaslighting, you're abusing people that are just like trying to be reasonable and rational and they want to talk about things. These extremists are like they're using every Machiavellian strategy to shut up the opposition. That is toxic. Well, it's a combination of toxic masculinity and femininity because it's chaotic in its design because it will destroy any kind of order to perpetuate itself. And it's masculine in its firmness and aggression. Well, aggression isn't masculine. It's like masculine aggression is overt, feminine aggression is covert. So passive aggressive is feminine, and overt aggression is masculine. So it's like toxic people are toxic people, independent of their uh, use of masculine or feminine traits. And that's also a controlling masculine trait in extreme feminists, but they are trying to control the narrative. And I'm not saying that there's no extremists on the right that are doing more or less the same thing, but I think, and this is a thought that came up yesterday, I think, when like who is constantly talking about this white supremacist thing, who is creating it, who is driving that narrative that the white supremacists are on top of this power pyramid. So there's a narrative that puts someone on top and then claims to want to destroy that thing. But if you've created a narrative around it which puts it on top, it will always be on top until you change the narrative. If the narrative is more real than reality, which in a lot of ways this whole feminist woke ideology is, it's more a war in the minds of people than a reality in the real world. This war is much more a war online on the interwebs than in actual reality. So I think that if the world one day, or if the internet broke for some reason, much of this psychosis would dissipate, I think, because a lot of these echo chambers would dissolve, because people would have to relate to their environment again, like their actual reality, rather than be stuck in the abstract world of internet. So I've babbled on for too long again. Uh, but there's some food for thoughts. Poisonous snakes. Some should be avoided. And it's better to be slightly conservative in a time of chaos and take a step back and see, should we really be doing this? What will happen if we, what would happen, say, what would happen if we removed shame from our collective culture? Like, really, what would happen if we removed shame? This toxic shame? It's the same thing. You can't you can't remove a piece, like a big stone of what built civilization without it crumbling Like if you remove shame altogether, that's like removing morality from culture. So you would actually take away people's rational and irrational fear of judgment. And what would happen? Would people be less or more abusive towards each other? Would people kill each other more? Would people steal? Would people fuck around? Would like what would happen if you actually removed shame completely from a human? Would you create a psychopath? Is that what happened? Like the people on the extremes, don't they have shame anymore? Have they eradicated shame from their thinking, from their sensing, from their feeling? And that's just one part. That's just one stone they're trying to take away. The same thing, like when people say like, "Oh, men should express their emotions more." Do you want men to express their anger? Do you want them to let everything out? Do you want men to become toxically feminine and be like, every time I feel something, I'm going to project it onto you and fucking, I'm going to have no self restraint. I'm going to just let it hang out. I'm just going to, do we want that? I don't think so. But same thing again, like it's how we digest and process emotions. We're not like suppression is not good, but complete expression is not good at it either. It's like, well, okay, here comes anger. Um, I'm angry at this. Why? Like you can digest your emotions without having to throw them at people. But the language around all this is so unnuanced and so just it's so bad, and we're not allowed to discuss it in more nuanced, in more uh, rational and reasonable ways, because then we are phobic, or we are bad because we're trying to see what's underneath. And most extreme people don't want us to remove the band-aids, their defense mechanisms, because it hurts too much. And we have to. We can't self-medicate everything away and then blame other people for it. We have to mature and actually talk about these things. Okay, now I've talked too much. See you next time.